It's the Yoba series.
Step 2. The relationship between me, my father, and alcohol. I think for me, initially, I don't really recall when anger wasn't a problem. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that I was an angry child or anything like that. I would probably say that I was more. I don't feel that anger was necessarily a problem in my life until I reached my sort of mid to late teens. And looking back, the real reason probably why that was is because a few different elements, as I'm sure it always is for everybody. It's not necessarily just one thing. The one thing for me that triggered a lot of anger and experiences with anger and situations that would arouse kind of anger is triggers through the relationship with me and my dad or my father, however you want to say it. And I will go into that a little bit more, but I would also say that there was also a feeling of expectation, and I'm sure that kids get that from their parents, whether it's from their mum or their dad or their guardian or someone who's close to them. I think that it's very much that you feel like you want to please them, and possibly some of the anger came from that too, that trying to make my way in life at the beginning of my kind of teenage years was definitely something where I felt that, I was trying to determine who I was going to be. For me, I definitely noticed that anger was a problem in my late teens or possibly early 20s. And again, it started, I think, because of a very clear breakdown of relationship or a relationship to myself and my father. My father has always had issues with alcohol, and as a younger man, he probably would be able to contain it to some degree. He'd be able to contain his use of alcohol to a point where he would not really show it, but he'd kind of go off and be out of the sort of family unit, if you like, for some period of time, and that's obvious that he was using it at that time. And unfortunately, that person, my father, has always had issues with alcohol for a long time, and has been a major part of his life, and also has been his relationship with alcohol has always been a major part of my life as well. I think that some of the key problems that I faced or would focus on, one of them would be my attitude. My attitude as a younger person was kind of very volatile and quite quick to react and quite quick to respond, even when the situation didn't necessarily need me to react or to respond. In fact, probably most, if not all situations, really don't need you to react or to respond unless they really are sort of very drastic. However, I was certainly walking around in life with that kind of mug, like you're walking, your mug, your face is sort of walking around with an expectation to find some form of trouble. And that's probably because, in reflection, and I've reflected on this for a long time, that it's probably due to the fact that I'm trying to consolidate my mind, reassure myself, try to defend myself to whatever degree I feel I need to defend my reason for being or whatever, and also trying to find myself. And I will go into this a little bit further, but definitely a lack of identity was, when I got a little bit older, I realized that there was a major lack of identity missing, and that I had to be able to accept that, and part of that acceptance allowed me to be able to understand that I have my own identity and no one else's, including my father's. I think for me, the anger is triggered quite often when there is a personal situation. This situation most commonly for me arises when there is a very quick response in terms of somebody else responding very quickly to me in a more emotional way, and I'm trying to navigate my way through that emotional response, or if the response is possibly reactive, that I'm being reactive, or they or whatever other party is being reactive, I immediately become defensive. And the way that I would say that I'm defensive is that in my head, it very much feels like I'm being backed into a corner. In my mind, in my mind's eye, I can feel me kind of pushing up against the wall of this corner of a room, and that the other person or the situation is growing on top of me. It's kind of pushing more and more into me until at some point I feel like I have to defend myself and push back. And that is exactly the time, that's exactly the trigger when I explode. My anger, rather than just pushing back to defend myself and possibly saying enough or stop or walk away from the situation, it's more explosive. It goes on the attack. So it's this big drawback of defense that can happen over a period of time. Situations don't always necessarily mean that they happen immediately. A lot of the time, situations can be growing between myself and another party, another person, another group of people. And over time, those things start to become more clouded. And I think in that time, the pressure of defending yourself eventually flips, and it has the complete opposite effect. And like I said, can be really explosive, unfortunately. I'm not going to give you a typical scenario because I'm sure that everyone can relate to some degree of that feeling or reaction. I do feel that a typical response would be when I'm trying to sort something out for someone else. I always have this slightly strange hero complex where I feel that I can sort of fix everybody's problems. And possibly that's why I've become a personal trainer and nutrition coach. But yeah, that's kind of where it comes from. And possibly sometimes getting too involved too easily, too quickly, can also be a way to land yourself in that type of situation with another person. And possibly they also too are being defensive, and at the same time, through them being defensive, they're kind of putting a lot of pressure on you, and you then become defensive. I think that one very good thing to note is that when you're young, when you're in your teens or in your early 20s, you are trying to break free of kind of your parents, you're trying to break free of home, you're trying to find your own identity, you're trying to find who you are, what you like, what you don't like. And so I think because of that, you're in a very volatile situation within yourself, where you're a sort of a more volatile mind. And I think that due to that, you are more likely to find yourself in situations where you are more vulnerable. I think that you place yourself in those types of situations because you are young, you are naive, and you don't necessarily know what you're doing is a good or a bad thing. And I'm not necessarily talking about, the worst types of things such as, doing drugs or, anything that society deems wrong. I'm not talking about that. I'm more talking about types of situations where you confront someone over something that actually could be done with more tact. You could possibly be more kind and more considerate to the other person and understanding of their situation too. That in turn, I feel, will lead to a much calmer and civil outcome. I would say that when you're kind of a teenager and you're in your 20s, you're definitely in situations where the situation can be difficult to navigate. And I think that is because you are a young person, and possibly the people that you're with are also young too, and also naive, and they have possibly also grown up a different way to how you have grown up, and that all is a big mixing pot of sort of feelings and emotions and where and how they need to be expressed. Now, for people who struggle with parents or siblings or people that they're close to, who have issues with addiction, but you know that person, you've known that person for possibly a long time, it is quite sad, and it is quite frustrating when you start to feel that as you're growing older and as you're getting older into your sort of, like I say, teenage years and 20s, you're starting to find that your relationship with that person is starting to become more difficult. The issues around the things that they're dealing with or not dealing with, probably more to my situation, relationships start to become frayed, and because it's someone that you are close to or you do care about, does start to have an internal mental effect on you, your perspective of life, how you view things, how you view other people, and how you view them, and that you start to feel that, why is this happening to me, or why is it happening to them? And how do I navigate myself in this? And I think that because of a naive brain and a naive mind, and a young person trying to find their way, I think it basically results in them turning possibly inwardly and becoming, sensitive to a lot of things in life, or outwardly, where you become more aggressive, you become more on the attack, and it's all the time. And I think, to put it into a nutshell, it basically revolves around the fact that the relationship between myself and my father, and his relationship with alcohol, and not being able to cope or deal with the normalities of life, basically made our relationship estranged. And that was very different to how it was when I was a child. Now, I'm not going to bore you with any more detail about my childhood or anything like that. This is not a psychoanalysis of myself. This is just a description of how things were, and to give you a baseline level as to where things would then go. If I were to describe anger, I would call it a forever burning ball of energy. It never dies. It never stops. It never ceases. It's always there, bubbling under the surface. And now that I can control it, it's actually a really good source of energy. It's a real, I'd be lost without it. And it's not the same type of anger that you would necessarily expect. When you hear the word anger, even, it probably, creates a picture in your mind of literal anger, temper, emotion, a violent change in someone's characteristics. But at the time when I was kind of learning to deal with my anger, I was definitely noticing that my attitude towards other people, and even my friends, my close friends, my childhood friends, was becoming slightly more stagnated, and I was growing a lot more distant away from them. And that's because I felt that my situation was unrelatable to other people, that I couldn't really talk to anyone about it. I didn't really feel that I could talk to my mum for whatever reasons. I certainly couldn't talk to my dad. And in general, I probably felt a lot more comfortable in hiding how I felt about those situations. I think at the time it was probably the lack of knowledge that I probably did need to talk about these things going on with me at the time. And like I say, probably feeling that there was no one else to be able to relate to when it came to these certain type of situations that are going on with you personally, but how they're starting to reflect on your relationship with other people, colleagues and friends. And that took a long time for me to really kind of learn. I'd say that actually took years to learn that my attitude towards other people was a big problem for them and also for me. How alcohol or any substance that is addictive can affect the relationship between you and your parent is very pronounced. I would probably say that with addiction, or people who suffer with addiction, what they don't realize, and I guess it is selfish, but what they don't realize is the addiction pretty much comes above anything else. It comes above their relationship with other people. So in my dad's case with me and his family, and even his neighbors, to some degree, yes, it's something that is very much, primary on their list of, where and when they're going to get the urge to use that substance to be able to relieve the way in which they feel. Subsequently, what that means for the other person is that they also have to kind of start to suffer with the substance abuse as well. A great example would be that you could talk to a person one day and they're absolutely fine. And literally the next day you could talk to them and they're aggressive, they're abusive, and they're really kind of slightly uncaring towards you. And the flip is so sort of severe and very significant that the only way to react to it probably at that time is to feel offended, is to feel angry. And I think if that's happening on a slightly regular occasion, is happening on a regular basis, it will have that effect on you to be able to feel angry, to feel bad tempered, to feel like you want to attack, but you can't attack the person who's just done it to you. Because I have always felt that when an issue arises with someone who's an alcoholic, who is someone who has problems with addiction, you don't necessarily feel angry straight away. You don't feel immediately bad tempered. I feel it kind of grows within you over time, and I feel that it mounts up. It doesn't necessarily mean that one reaction begets another reaction. I think quite a lot of the time it builds up in a sort of ball or a mass. And then because that ball gets so big, it burns for a much, much longer time. It kind of is this ball of energy. And yeah, like I say, it can burn for a long period of time. And then that has a much longer effect in terms of your personal timeline, where you've got to get over that initial reaction that someone has, been aggressive to you, has been abusive towards you, has either verbally or physically abused an individual. Why I don't think addiction had a negative effect on me? Well, to some degree, I guess in a way I was an addict because I suffered with anorexia. And so I basically made not eating food my addiction. And I would say that I am an addictive character. I'm certainly addicted to my job now and my career and the things that I do. And possibly there are traits of my father in my characteristics personally that are there. But why I feel that the actual substance abuse didn't kind of filter down to me is because my father, his father, and his father's father had all struggled with alcohol. And for me, from a very young age, I was kind of like, I'm just not interested in this. I'm not interested in repeating this cycle. Okay, I'm bad tempered. Okay, I'm angry, but I'm not interested in repeating this cycle on myself. I've got enough stuff going on. And I think also in terms of, parenting from my mum, she never really drank at all. She never smoked. She never drank. She never, really had any substance abuse at all. There was no substance abuse in my home, and so I had a very secure environment from that respect. And for that, I have always been grateful towards my mum for providing that for me. And that's probably why I never went down the same road that my dad went down, and also that I hadn't been down his path either. I hadn't been through his challenges, his turmoils. I hadn't been through those same things. I've had my own journey. And so to that respect, I don't feel that there is really an excuse to then kind of say, right, I'm going to do the same thing to me just because that's what they did. I want to do something new. I want to do something different. And if there is a fault there, especially at the age of 34, which I am now, I want to be able to create more than I want to be able to take away.
It's the Yo Bossy Wish.